Welcome to the Magnificast. I'm Matt. And I'm Dean. Just kidding. Dean's actually not here. I was gonna do the entire podcast as if I were Dean and also myself, but maybe that's not a good idea. Okay, well, I guess I should just let the secret out. Dean's on vacation this week, and I had to find someone to fill in. Obviously, no one can fill in Dean's space, but I invited my friend John Brittingham. He is a philosophy professor at the place that I work, the institution I teach at, and he's here to co-host with me, so that's exciting. John's research focuses a lot on Latin American philosophy and also some French philosophy, people like Levinas and Derrida, though John has one other weird kind of fascination, and that is summer camp. When I asked John to co-host, it didn't take long to figure out what we're going to talk about. Camp and all the weird disciplinary structures that come with it are a thing John has spent way too much time thinking about, and now me too. Now I've thought about it for way too much time. Uh-oh. So get ready to join the weird conversation and camp out. Okay, so every week we start just by catching up a little bit. Since John is the guest here and guest host John Brittingham, we're going to start and just see what John's been up to. John, what have you been up to?
Currently I'm working at a summer camp run in conjunction with Duke University. It's called the Duke Talent Identification Program. It is the summer camp for nerds. Kids, parents, and sometimes the kids themselves pay a lot of money to take classes taught usually by graduate students or professors. And I've been lucky enough for the past 8 years to be able to teach philosophy to teenagers who are like eager to learn about it. At the University of Georgia site for it. So that's what I've been up to. It's a lot. It's like you're teaching like 6 hours a day. So
yeah, that's wild, man. What classes are you teaching, or what's the content?
Just one. I teach a class called Philosophy of Knowledge, which the idea behind it originally was like, hey, let's have an epistemology class. And I was like, hey, that's boring. We'll do that for a week, which is what we do. So we do like very classic Western philosophy, epistemology stuff. So it's like Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Hume, that kind of a thing. And then we get to the interesting stuff. So I use all of that as a setup to get students interested in talking about knowledge and getting used to like philosophy's inherent quirks. And then we talk about ethics and politics and aesthetics for the rest of the time. So, yeah.
Neat. That sounds really cool. What's like the best thing you've read so far? Like what have your students been really into?
My students love existentialism, which makes me really happy because I also enjoy existentialism. So like we read some Fanon, and they really liked Fanon. We read the beginning of Black Skin, White Masks, and it was really cool to get them into existentialism, not through like some French white dudes, but through like Fanon and de Beauvoir. They read a little bit of Simone de Beauvoir. What was it? Ethics of Ambiguity. A little bit from that.
Neat.
Yeah. So like it was.
Yeah, that's way better than Sartre.
Yeah.
Or Camus. Those guys suck.
Yeah. I mean, Sartre is take it or leave it. Camus is interesting, but like, he's like friends with them, but way cooler than them. And so he's just kind of like, yeah, all right, I'm going to go over here and write my, like award-winning novel.
Yeah, I read The Stranger when I was like 18. And I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, same here.
I've reread it since, and I thought it was less cool,
Yeah,
but it's all right.
yeah.
It's fun. It's a fun thing.
There's a whole like Islamophobic and weird relationship with Northern African Arab self identity that is in the background of The Stranger that I didn't pick up on the first time I read it. And reading, yeah, yeah, I
Oh
did a
yeah,
similar thing. I read it through again. And I was like, oh, this is weird.
yeah. Some like less than subtle racist stuff happens, and you don't catch it
Yeah,
until the second time around.
which is disheartening in part because Camus was such a supporter of Algerian independence, but he was also similar to Derrida, like a white Algerian, and so
Right.
both of them had a very complicated relationship with Algiers. The city of Algiers would later become Algeria, the country.
So this episode we're talking about summer camp, and I guess more specifically like Christian summer camps.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, which is kind of a little bit of a different sort of topic than we usually do on the old Magnificast.
Mm-hmm.
There's not an ingrained or obvious connection to talking about communism or something, which is, I mean, fine. Sometimes you need to not do communism. I mean,
Yeah.
not really, but sometimes we can talk about other things, I guess.
Yeah.
So, John, you're the one that pitched the idea of summer camp to me,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, I think it's a fun idea. So, can you tell me like what your interest is in summer camp? Sort of more than just like
Mm-hmm.
I like going.
Yeah. Summer camp is a really unique kind of an experience because, on the one hand, it's very similar to tons of things that at least Western, like North American, predominantly bourgeois culture tends to embrace, right? So like people go on like writing retreats, or they go to like, we're gonna have like a staff like retreat where we're gonna go and like learn about each other and learn about how to like work well together and stuff like that. And we even have like, you and I both work at the same university, have a kind of summer camp that that we just went on with the CCCU,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then we'll also have like, hey, welcome back to work summer camp called Development Week or something like that, right? And the idea being that it's this sort of time and space of frequent contact with the same set of people that is separated out from the time of every day. So there's a bit of a like, this is a special time. I mean, this is a special place. This is not the usual, and the rules are different there. And so they're like really and summer camps run the gamut, right? So like I have worked at summer camps where they said, okay, you need to show us back when people listened to like CDs, you need to show us your CD collection that you brought with you,
Yeah.
because we don't want you listening to secular music while you're here, because it'll be a bad influence on you, and by extension a bad influence on the student, like the campers we have here. So I literally had like worked for a place where they like went through all of these different CDs. They're like, all right, you need to keep this one in your car. You need to keep this one in your car. Also, you had to sign out whenever you were going to leave camp, like weird things like that.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't really want you to have a cell phone. From that end of the spectrum to here, where like it's practically today is practically a holiday for the campers because it is their so-called gay day, the day after Pride, the day that's the 2-year anniversary of the Supreme Court of the United States ruling on the legality of gay marriage. And so the kids are like all about that here, and they're so excited about it. It's like everybody is all rainbow everything. And yeah, and so it's a very different set of rules than say, or set of expectations than say, life in ordinary time in ordinary spaces.
Yeah,
Which
that's
I think
right.
is interesting.
that is interesting. So Dean isn't here right now,
Mm-hmm.
but one approach I think Dean would take to this, channeling him for a hot second. One approach he would
Mm-hmm.
take to this thing is he would say that summer camp is a type of technology.
Mm-hmm.
And then since like I would add to Dean's comment about technology, saying that the summer camp reminds me a lot of what Agamben calls like an apparatus or the
Mm-hmm.
apparatus, the dispositif, you know.
Yeah.
So if you're not familiar with some like a really deep cut in contemporary French philosophy or Italian philosophy,
I mean, I've read State of Exception.
no, I mean, but all of our listeners,
Oh,
oh
yeah,
my
that's
god,
true.
right? Like,
Go read State of Exception.
State of Exception is a very good
Yeah.
book.
Read the first two chapters. The rest of it,
Yeah. All of the parts where he throws shade at George W. Bush are very fun.
yeah.
They're like it's no longer relevant, but still very good.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, in a different book, Agamben wrote. It's called "What Is an Apparatus." It's like it's really short, but basically he says that an apparatus is a set of strategies, of relations, of forces supporting and supported by certain types of knowledge. It's like a regime where you go into it and a different type of logic kind of takes over for a while and takes over like your daily practices, your daily rhythms, and you have to live by some different rules. I've been to quite a few summer camps in my day as well, and the one that always sticks out to me the most is like church summer camp.
Oh, definitely.
Because I think it's the most regimented and it's the most different in terms of like the way you live your daily life. Maybe at least. So like just thinking through like what my day was like and trying to think about the times when I'm like made to do something I wouldn't normally do. I mean, it's really easy. I mean, I would get up way earlier than I would normally. I'd have to go to the tabernacle, aka like sweaty church, different than regular church because it's summer
Sweaty
camp.
church.
Sweaty church.
Yeah. So one of the places where I worked, Durley camp, the tabernacle is right uphill from a reservoir that has the grungiest, like, most terrible water in the world. Like, you would go into that water, you come out, you immediately take a shower because you smell like the leftover ooze from a Ninja Turtles movie, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
you just smell awful. But because of that huge body of water being right there, you would when the humidity got really high, all these horseflies would come out and they would just attack you while you're sitting there in the tabernacle.
Oh no!
So you just they just go for you, and you're like, oh my god, what's going on? Yeah, it was not good.
Yeah, well, so yeah, you'd be in the tabernacle for a while in the morning, and then after that, after you sang some of the worship songs, your favorite, I don't know, Jars of Clay songs or like whatever, Chris Tomlin, those are the people. You'd sing those ones hard. And then you leave and you go do your activities, and then you go to lunch, and then you do more activities. And at the end of the day, you come back to the tabernacle and do the same sweaty church routine all over again until you have to go to sleep. Anyway, so it's like a whole rhythm of life where someone else is
definitely.
Someone else is in charge. They're trying to make you do some things to make you a certain type of person. Or there's a definite understanding where you're doing a practice that you're doing a practice for a week that's supposed to stick with you for way longer than a week. And of course that doesn't work, but you know, at least not for a week.
I keep thinking of at the beginning of Essay 2 of Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morality, he asks this question: how do you breed an animal that makes promises? And so I was just thinking about that, like, how do you breed, how do you produce, how do you create a certain type of being that will behave in particular ways? You know, and like one of the ways you do that is by constant reinforcement, right? So it's a lot of it is this kind of conditioning. And what's interesting about it to me, it wasn't until you were talking about it that I didn't make the connection between monastic life and camp life, and that it has a very monastic quality to it. Like the majority of camps are in remote places, so they're not like right in town, but they're off cloistered away, right? And you live in close proximity to all of the same people, and you see them all the time. And people have very different tasks that they do, and very different activities that they'll go to, but they become known as like that person, right? So it's like, oh, that's the kid who started Frisbee Club, right? Or like that's the fastest Bible quizzer in 5 states, right?
Or like that's the kid who has a family size of Doritos in his room.
Yeah, exactly, right? And it turns into like some version of Heavyweights, that Disney movie where they're like bartering with candy bars that they hide all over the place.
Yeah, it's a
and
great
it eventually
movie.
turns into like children torturing adults.
Yeah,
You know, yeah.
that's the best part.
That's was it cracked.com has a great hot take on like 90s movies about camp were all most 90s movies starring kids were all about them trying to kill or torture adults. Like children were terrible.
Well, maybe we can like rein this conversation back in.
Yeah.
So summer camps, it seem like they're about formation. They're about producing types of people. I guess thinking specifically of Christian summer camps. I mean, we can get to others as well, but Christian summer camps. What type of people are they trying to produce? Like, what is the what's the desire? Do you think? At least the places you've worked.
Yeah. The places that I have worked have all been on, I would say, the more conservative end of evangelical Protestantism.
Oh, hey, let me interject really quick here.
Yeah.
Dean is Catholic, and usually this is a very Catholic-heavy podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I are both Protestants, so
That is correct. Yeah.
So Dean's away, post theses on the doors of churches, reform things.
Definitely.
Sorry, Catholics, this episode is not for you.
If I disagree with you, Matt, I am going to form a new denomination.
Oh, nice.
There's nothing you can do to stop me.
That's cool, because I've already formed my own as well.
Oh, well, fine.
I swear, if you come here, I will deny you a small thimble of Welch's grape juice and piece of Hawaiian bread. You can't have any of it. It's all only for people of my sect.
That's fine. I can just go to the store. We consecrate by like a confirmation via text message. So it's just like, okay, is it consecrated? And then it's just like somebody does the thumbs up emoji.
Thumbs up
it's
emoji.
Like, all right, ready to go. And
thumbs up emoji,
it's really just
emoji.
It's like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. All of it together. There you go. Right? Don't even need the wine.
Right. Oof.
Right.
No transubstantiation here.
No. So anyway, the places that I worked at were very, very evangelical Protestant. I would say very conservative, even though I don't like using those terms, but very kind of very concerned with being a kind of fortress against, and like, so I would put it this way, that the types of summer camps I worked at that were Christian camps were really concerned with, one, being a fortress against the world in which they lived, seeing Christianity and a certain kind of morality as being under siege by those around them, and as a result, they wanted to provide. I'm going to use the term safe space, but it means very different things, right? So they like
repressive space.
Yeah, exactly. Like a bomb shelter. Like basically the Christian camps I worked for were like, hey, you remember the beginning of Fallout 4? Yeah, that, but with like Hawaiian punch and like too much white bread for Yeah.
So it's the Benedict option.
Oh yeah, it's totally the Benedict option. Like this is one of the things you and I were talking about earlier, that like it seems like summer, like what Rodrera wants is basically like full-time Christian summer camp, just like tucked away in the woods where everybody can be like chased together or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds what he's after.
Yeah.
Except like Rod Dreher would be that guy at summer camp who wants you to sign his T-shirt, but you don't want to.
Yeah, exactly. I
Please,
also
Rod Dreher,
suspect that
no.
he would be the guy at summer camp who like always wears like really long, almost to the knee wool socks, but also like sandals. So you're just
Yeah.
like, all right, dude, it's really hot. Why are you wearing wool? Oh, it's moisture wicking. No, no, it's not. It's meant to keep you warm. Why don't you just wear the sandals? Right? Like, I just imagine him. There was this great old 90s Nickelodeon show called Salute Your Shorts. I
Yeah.
just imagine him as like, he and Ugg would really get along. Ugg, the like senior counselor who always wore like 1,000 SPF, 1,000 SPF sunscreen on his nose,
Right.
and yeah, and who
Do you
wanted to
remember?
go
Do you
ahead.
remember the Halloween episode of Salute Your Shorts?
No, I don't.
They thought there's like a man. I'm desperately trying to remember exactly the plot, but it's something like there was like a spooky ghost / serial killer that was gonna
Yeah,
come kill everybody, and it was Budnick.
of course it was Budnick.
Yeah,
It's always Budnick,
it's
right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Um. So there's that like fortress mentality thing, which the desire to be away to get away from it all feeds into that, because there's this kind of idea that children will escape from the harshness of reality, and they'll get to go to this place that is uh, almost Edenic, right? And then on the other hand, there's a kind of like military training that goes hand in hand with that,
Mm-hmm.
where it's about really like uh, the rhythms of a week of summer camp are about kind of breaking students down to then build them back up into a particular kind of Christian person, but that's not explicitly what they're trying to do. Like, the point is this: the training is to provide them with an experience that they can always refer back to, and that they have the right sort of beliefs. But what they're training them to do is something different than what they say they're doing, right? What these camps do. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
No, I think it does. So summer camp has, I guess, in like its disciplinary qualities, it trades in bodily discipline, but also just as much affect. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you go to summer camp, it's not like it's not an intellectual sort of endeavor. I mean, maybe you're a Bible quizzer and like you're Bible quizzing
Yeah.
at summer camp, and that's fine. That's like something, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Very intellectual. Listen, I was just in it for the girls, but some people are really into it.
Yeah.
Not me. But I say it trades in affect insofar as sort of like the ecstatic religious experiences that they craft there for you. Um, they they have a lot to do with like how you'll perceive Christianity and your relationship to it in that moment, but how you'll continue to perceive your relationship to it in the future. I think of like actually, I don't know. I mean, like anyone who's ever been to church camp, you know exactly what it's like, and you know what I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
about. Like it's Thursday night, and on Thursday night is when there's an altar call, and that's like when the
Mm-hmm.
emotions are played up. There's like
Yeah.
30 zillion choruses of how great is our God, and whatever is going on, you're supposed to feel like just like the absolute worst about yourself.
Yeah.
It's like these intense moments of like of real repression about who you are and the things you've done
Yeah.
prior to camp. And there's a real psychoanalytic turn, I think, there, because it's also everyone's like, even though there's all of these like really terrible things you kind of go through, you're dredging up these feelings where you've fallen short of the glory of God or whatever. You end up like that's the best night of camp for some reason, and like that's really messed up because it's actually the worst night of camp. It's the night where you should
Mm-hmm.
feel the worst. But there's a psychoanalytic insight, I think, that comes into play here from Lacan and Zizek and stuff too, where you enjoy your sickness, like you enjoy that type of like emotional repression a little bit.
Yeah.
So far that becomes the best night of camp, and you like you can't. That's what you take away, is that kind of life altering moment where you experience the extreme repression that religion gives you and puts on your sort of personal life.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about enjoying the wound that is that particular kind of event. But it's also the sort of thing that they've been building towards. I remember when I was working at a summer camp in Greenville called Durley, the one with the horseflies. A colleague of mine there told me a story about being a counselor, and he had like these like 10-year-old kids, and they're all sort of going through like, hey, what are your expectations about camp? Are you excited about like his first night? And this one kid's like, I've never been to summer camp before. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. And this other kid gets up and he's like, I know what's going to happen. He also has a very, very low voice for a 10-year-old, which no one understands why. Because he's like staring out the window pensively, and then he goes, on the first night, everybody's going to be happy. And everybody's going to be all celebrating and giggling and whatnot. And you're going to hear like a cool story. And the pastor's going to be real funny. And then afterwards, you're just going to hang out with people. And then on the second night, you're going to learn about sin. You're going to learn about bad stuff. And you're like, oh, I've heard about bad stuff. You don't know about bad stuff, kids. You don't know nothing. Right? So this is like this kid. He's just sort of a weird kind of like... he's like a criminal informant from a 1970s movie. You don't know nothing, he says, smoking on his like candy cigarette, right? He's like, on the third night, they talk to you about this Jesus guy, and you go, oh, I like that dude. I want to know him. And then on the fourth night, you cry. Everyone cries, no exceptions. And you like go up to the altar, even though you've gone the previous 3 years. And this kid, like, this is no joke. 10-year-old kid is saying all of this, and he's just nailing it, right? That there's this build-up, and then you're really, really sad, and you're crying, and you feel awful about yourself, and then the next night, you hear that Jesus loves you, and that he died for you, and then everything's all better. It's going to be all better after that, right? And he just names the rhythm of this, right? That there is a kind of like, hey, welcome to this, place. Oh, by the way, here are a couple of helpful concepts. By the way, you're an absolute dirtbag, and your parents hate you, and everything that's awful in your life is kind of your fault. But you know what? God loves you anyway. Right? And so it sets up that very particularly evangelical kind of salvation narrative that human beings are bad, and that feeling guilt is the pinnacle of emotional or of that ecstatic experience. Mm-hmm. And then the release is joyful, but doesn't actually provide you the steps. Like it's not a complete moral framework. It's an experiential framework, which I think the goal is to get kids to believe a certain thing about themselves and then about God. And in trying to do that, what they are doing is saying the most real emotion you are going to feel is your own like worthlessness and guilt. And then there's a kind of release that happens. And so God is about this emotional release, but also about this extreme guilt. And these two kind of contradictory emotions become the basis of one's religiosity.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the sort of thing that those who are organizing these camps are planning, because what they're inheriting is a model of evangelism that goes back to the old like second great awakening and later revival style camp meetings. So that's where the religious connection is there. It's it's a kind of borrowing from this older revivalist style of Protestantism that swept through the Americas, but it's not. There's not a one-to-one connection there in terms of the history of the summer camp as an apparatus or as an organization.
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
the
Christian summer camp is particularly like it reproduces a particular ideological arrangement and arrangement of desire in people that I think regular summer camps don't, or if they do, but make maybe in a different way or a different set of
I would
desires.
say a different way. In large part because the summer camp where I currently work, like, it is very, very progressive. It is a very LGBTQ friendly space. It is a very sort of more progressively in terms of American politics, more like left liberal kind of progressive space. But it's also thoroughly religious in certain aspects, right? It's thoroughly cultish in the same way that a religion is cultish. And you can step back and say, okay, so what are the material conditions that produce this sort of thing? Well, first of all, it's a very expensive summer camp, and so the kids who come have to be a part of communities that have a lot of disposable income, right? So there's that part of it. The other part of it is it's packed with academics, and academics are, as a group, as a demographic, by and large, much more politically left than they are right. Which is not to say that everybody is that way, because it's also in the Bible Belt. So you get people who might, in certain political senses, be very politically left, but also in terms of their kind of like social teaching and their morality, be much less open-minded and tolerant, right? And then I've been saying this for years working at this summer camp, that the way that it functions is not dissimilar to that kind of salvific model. It just doesn't have that salvation narrative. But they do dances because one of the goals is to socialize nerds. And at these dances, there's a very particular liturgy that goes on. That the kids dance for a while, and then at a certain point, there's a litany. There are these songs that have to be played in a particular order. And those songs, some of them have dances that are a part of the camp, and others don't. So, like, it starts with, let's do the time warp again from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And the kids have all these things that they shout that are connecting it up with, like, Rocky Horror subculture and stuff like that. And then at a certain point, it gets to these songs where everybody gets in a circle and they link arms, and then they're like, all these kids are just weeping and wailing. And they're singing the lyrics to these songs. And in total honesty, having grown up in a Pentecostal fundamentalist church, it is not unlike those kinds of revivals and those types of camp revival meetings that I had. It is almost indistinguishable from Bible camp. Like, no joke, it's almost indistinguishable. The difference is they're singing, like, We Fall Down and How Great Is Our God a million times. Here, they're singing American Pie. Like, no joke. And the impact is so strong that there are people that I work with who were campers who, when they hear American Pie on the radio, they will start to tear up. Like, that conditioning is real. And there's no what we would call religious content to it. But it's thoroughly, thoroughly religious.
Right, yeah. Well, on that note of, like, you gotta socialize nerds, which, I mean, it's like a very good undertaking, probably.
Yeah.
I wish someone would socialize me more. You camps do end up making these kind of interesting, like, biopolitical sort of moves in that they suggest and they think up like what it is that kids should do and like what they need to do. So like there's this really interesting play between like adult authority and kids and like the sort of like the subjects of children, but it's different than it's like a way different relationship between like that of a parent and a child. Instead, it's like the knowing and savvy adult and trying to think like, what do these kids need to learn? Like, what do they need to do for the world? Oh, they need to learn how to dance. They need to learn how to talk to, like possible romantic interests or something like that.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? What do you think about the ways disciplinary knowledge is used in like from the adult to kids? It's kind of like a weird thing.
Yeah. This is one of the things that we talk about in my class a good deal. One of the philosophers that we talk about a great deal, that really peppers all of the weeks that I teach at TIP, the camp where I'm at currently, is Foucault. And we talk about that disciplinary power, and thinking about it not as inherently bad or not as inherently valued in and of itself, but I like to get the students to contrast how their school functions with how the camp functions, but also to see the ways in which they're very similar. And part of it is that adults are entrusted with this kind of not production of knowledge, but repetition of certain kinds of knowledge, certain kinds of social knowledge, certain kinds of acceptable behaviors, and things like that. And so even though it might be a place that claims to be very progressive, or in the case of Bible camps, places that are very regressive or reactionary, the relationship is still one where there is an authority who models for students the ways they should act or not act. And it's interesting too, at this camp more than at any other I've been, the breakdown in terms of age and kind of social, not social status, but social positioning. So the majority of people who work on the residential side, who are like counselors and who like deal with the students when they're not in the classes, are college students, current undergraduates. And much of what I find with them is this very strong desire to be recognized as an authority. And so for them, how they perform their authority is to be very vocal about it and to come down on it. And that seems to be coming primarily from a place of insecurity, right? And so, these are, undergraduates. These are people who are like our students. They are early 20-somethings or teenagers themselves who are trying to exert some kind of authority that isn't explicitly there, in the way that like some, early 30s bearded, bespectacled, beige oval who looks like he owns a coffee shop and talks about microbrewing but never does, aka myself, does not have to worry about that in the same way, because I occupy a different social space, right? Like I have these are 2 letters and a period, like doctor, in front of my name that for some odd reason signifies a certain kind of authority over other people. And so biopolitically, I exert that kind of authority. And what I find for myself is, knowing that that's the case, I want to undermine that to some extent, to condition the students or to discipline them to be suspicious of certain kinds of or certain performances of authority. It's I'm trying to think of how to put it, but it's very interesting to note the difference between those who are like the instructors, who are like full-on adults or graduate students, and those who are undergraduates and how they enact their disciplinary power, because the kids want to get to know these people who are, lording over them to some extent,
Yeah.
or are responsible to them, and my experience has been that they enjoy seeing people who are not their parents enact this set of practices that we call adulthood in the United States. But they're also very suspicious of those who do so without any kind of legitimacy. So it's very ideological to an extent. And what I mean by that is in his lectures on ideology and utopia, Paul Ricoeur talks about the ways in which there seems to be some desire. Now he's talking about, totalitarian regimes, and in particular Russia and the Soviet satellite states during the height of the Cold War. And he says it's this really interesting thing that you notice where these are governments that have tanks and they have soldiers and they have all kinds of state apparatuses and institutions that they can use to simply demonstrate their power. But for them, it's not enough to demonstrate that power. What Ricoeur notes is that these totalitarian regimes wouldn't just send out the tanks. They have to make a show of it, right? So, it's not enough to just say, hey, by the way, people living in this area, in this one area, there's a battalion stationed right next to your area, right next to your neighborhood. No, they have to march them through the streets. Why? Because there's this desire to have legitimated power.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I meant earlier, too, in the ways that, biopolitical spots like camps trade in affect, too.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, that's what gets people excited. To see that type of power is something, kind of, I mean, the Luz-Guattari would say, well, it's an erotic power, there's, something, really, some, horny stuff going on there. But
yeah, oh, trust me, there's horny stuff going on in camps.
Well, I mean, it's, mostly horny stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
But okay, so those are some good notes. I don't know. What about, so the place that you're at, the camp that you're in, it trades in affect just like other places, trades in ideology. Yeah. There's lots of that going on there. Mm-hmm. Church camp probably more so. What, as someone who has been a subject of church camp, mm-hmm. and then also been behind the repressive state apparatus of church camp.
Yeah.
What type of person do you think they wanted you to be, or what type of person did they want to churn out in that sort of camp factory?
I think that what they wanted to churn out was the type of person who would be evangelistic in terms of their Christian identity, and their belonging to particular kinds of communities that held explicitly held particular beliefs, right? So it was the summer camps that I went to and that I worked at were all about agreeing to a very particular narrative about Christianity, about salvation, right? And I mean, you can just map on. There's this thing in Protestantism. Dean might know about it because he knows. He knows it. It's called the Romans Road, and it is cherry picking particular verses from the epistle, Paul's epistle to the Romans, that lays out a very particular idea of what it means to understand one's situation before God, to understand the weight of sin, and what is necessary for Christian belief and Christian life. And so, to an extent, like I had mentioned earlier, there are kind of two streams going there. There is this explicit desire to have you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord, which is, I think, from Romans 10. I was a Bible quizzer. but it's been years and years and years. And one of the books we quizzed on was Romans, which by no means makes me an expert. One of the things that I've learned working in a religion department is just how infinitesimally small my knowledge of the Bible and my knowledge of Christian theology are. But there's this desire to make an explicit confession of faith, that being enough, right? So explicitly that is the kind of person they want, somebody who's going to confess that, and then that confession carries on out into the world to other people. That's that kind of what I talked about, that sort of military training is like, we're going to teach you the skills you need to know to go and do these sorts of things. But what you get taught is something different. And I think what you get taught is, well, one of the, we've been talking about it in a kind of negative light, but one of the really beautiful things about camp is it teaches you the value of community. And it teaches you the ability to transcend the kind of individualism that is really prominent in the United States. And to see the value of people who are very different from you, because you have to spend so much time there with them. And I think that that's a very important lesson, and it's the sort of thing that that Bible camps, while being in one way, Bible camps in being one way very selective, right? That people who are Christians or whose like family members are Christians send them there, or nonetheless not as exclusive and as homogenous as, say, where I work right now. Which, on the one hand, you might say, yeah, it's diverse in terms of sexual orientation, in terms of gender performativity, in terms of having gotten better, but by no means excellent, racial diversity. It nonetheless is still economically not very diverse. And so in terms of class, in terms of those sorts of things, and also in terms of race, it is arguably more exclusive than the Bible camps that I've worked at and attended. That said, the negative side of those camps and what they're trying to produce is something like a Christianity that is built around feelings of guilt and a kind of briefly felt but not structurally sound release from that guilt.
Yeah.
And in that regard, then, you can see how that theology, or you can see how that disciplinary pattern maps onto certain kinds of theology that are very heavy on sin, that are very heavy on guilt, and that treat salvation and absolution as connected to confession, and not confession as in the practice of confession the way that the Catholic Church practices confession, but confession is in like evangelizing, like telling everybody, hey, by the way, I'm a Christian and you should be a Christian too, and also you're going to hell, right? And that heaven is like this thing that's like way far away, and it's not close to you, and it's not a sort of attainable thing. And so it's weird because it's a kind of, these camps are a kind of utopia that treats, or they truck in a kind of utopian vision that they treat as nearly unattainable in terms of theology.
Yeah, that sounds right. Here's like a really funny story. I don't know, it's not really that funny. It's actually really depressing now that I'm kind of reflecting on it. But I think speaks to at least this thing about the production of certain type of people, what adults say children should learn, so on. Okay. So I remember I went to this specifically evangelical camp that was associated with the Nazarene Church, which is fine. I don't know. Nazarenes, what are you going to do? Anyway, so when you got there, you could do like three different things. Okay, first you could play like real sports. Two, you could play camp games, like not real sports.
Mm-hmm.
Three, you could be in the choir and do like a musical thing at the end of the
Yeah.
camp. Me, I can't do real sports, and I definitely can't do fake sports either. So I jumped in the choir track, because also that's where all the punk kids were as well,
Mm-hmm.
because it was not outside, and I don't know, not sports also. So anyways, I jumped in there, and I remember there was like there was not lots of pushback, but there are a few pretty candid conversations about this, like, hey, are you sure? Like, do you want to be out with the guys and not in here with all of these women? Because it was also mostly women. It was a pretty gendered thing too. And I remember having that conversation with more than one person on more than one occasion. Like, you can switch anytime you want. Like, you don't have to stay in here and do this. Like, very enforcing like a behind the back like sexual, like gendered politics of like you don't, guys don't really sing, like, that's not like a thing, right? Like, yeah, you can pretend to like it or whatever, but it's mostly for girls. But that was like even less than like that was just like sort of like a small aside of the grander sort of ideological formation that's going on, but sort of just a small, minute, behind the back moment where that culture of conservative Christianity was enforced, and like had a moment where like it was trying to be worked out, trying to be reproduced. I don't know. I know you were trying to say some positive things about formation and community a minute ago, but like I don't have very many things to say that are good about Christian camps.
I think you're exactly right on especially that reinforcement of particular kinds of gender roles. There is a lot of restriction of association between it was, I mean, at these Christian summer camps, it was boys and girls, and there's no continuum. It's a binary, end of story, right? So like, and so there's like the girl at the one that I went to when I was a kid. There was the girls' side of the dorm, and there was the boys' side of, like, we all stayed in this dormitory thing with like wooden paneling from the 70s. It was, and like prison bunk beds. It was a scary place, right? And you were not allowed to intermingle. And the idea of friendships between boys and girls was extremely odd and always viewed with suspicion. It was either, you are going to, like, you're only friends with them because you as a male have this sexual desire towards them, or you want to marry them. Not that those two are mutually exclusive.
Right.
And what ends up happening is that, like, even if you're a teenager and you're like, you're a teenage boy and you're into girls, you still also, like, aren't necessarily in total agreement with the idea that you can't be friends, like good friends with women, but that still gets reified, and so you're in this weird space where you're trying to figure out whether or not you agree with the very thing that you're sort of there to help reproduce. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that to me is very weird. Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to just like hammer on Bible camps as negative, and then this, like, bougie liberal camp for nerds that I work at now is like, fully automated luxury communism or something like that.
Right.
Because it's not,
I mean, like, yeah, I mean, the point of this conversation, I don't think is to just dunk on Christian camps, even though we are, because it's easy. I think the point of the conversation is to, like, demonstrate the ways that camps are about formation and the reproduction of, like, subjects. That's kind of a weird thing. I think this is more of a Foucaultian conversation.
I think you're right. Let me ask you this though: what? So you mentioned that there are non-sports camp games. So there's sports games, non-sports camp games. What was either your favorite or the most interesting non-sports camp game that you played when you went to camp?
We played some pretty good matches of capture the flag. I don't know. That's not a sport, right? That doesn't count. I mean, I'm sure there's an official capture the flag league.
Yeah, of course. There's a capture the flag league. Hashtag millennials, right?
Yeah.
Or some weird, terrible thing like that, right? Like there are Foursquare leagues.
Yeah.
For the
dude, no, we played Foursquare hard though too.
Yeah. Foursquare's no joke.
No cherry bombs, no typewriters.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty strict about those rules.
I played with a guy who would put so much spin on the ball, that it was like impossible to predict where it went. But he was also like the most calm, nicest human, that you're just like, every reaction you had to him, like completely schooling you by putting like a little backspin on it, so it like bounced into someone else's area instead of yours or whatnot. Right. Every reaction was an overreaction compared to this guy who was like, oh, almost had it. And he's just like he's like playing barefoot because he always wore flip flops or something like that. I say that because I asked that because a lot of people that I talk to who have worked at summer camps have like especially Christian summer camps, have weird sports that people thought were like an actual sport that you should do. And I remember two in particular that stuck out to me. One was when I was a camper at this like regional teen camp. Excuse me, in Pennsylvania where I worked, and what it was it was kind of like there's this thing in Double Dare where you had to like dive into a giant like vat of some weird opaque fluid in order to find something, and you could only use like your mouth or whatnot. So they decided, hey, this will be a great idea. Let's do something like this. Except they didn't have some weird fluid and like a big fake pool. So what they did was they just went out to a field, and they dug a big ditch, and they left a hose near it. So it's just this huge, like, big mud pit that you had to dive into. And you couldn't see it. People are like splashing mud in your eyes, and you're just getting soaked and covered in mud. And they're like, yeah, teenagers like this. They like getting in the mud.
Teenagers love like, getting dirty.
Right. And the other game that stuck out to me was when I didn't know about it until I worked there, but at that Durley camp I talked about, they played a game called Mission Impossible. And Mission Impossible was a game in which there is this like tower on Durley's site that in the past has had a bell on top of it, but they would take the bell down, they would climb to the top, and somebody had a huge flashlight. And you always had to play at night. And what they would do is below the tower was a bucket. And all the campers would be given cards, and they were separated out into different groups by number. So it was like cards 1, 2, 3, and 4. And these cards had a Bible or an image of a Bible on them. And the goal of Mission Impossible was to get past these roving counselors with flashlights, past a bunch of obstacles, and underneath the tower without being caught, as in the lights flashed on you have to stop there, in order to drop these Bibles off. And the whole premise was you're smuggling Bibles into communist Russia.
Oh
and they would play the Mission Impossible theme song.
That can't be real.
No, it was real. It's
no, but
totally real.
The mythos was there, though, that it was really communist Russia.
Yeah, it didn't change to communist China until, like, I don't know, like 2012 or something like that. So when I worked there in 2005, it was like, no, your job is to get these Bibles to come into communist Russia by sneaking around at night and not getting caught by,
oh my
like
gosh,
the the KGB or something like that.
What's the communist version of that game, do you think?
You sneak copies of the manifesto into the hands of workers on their breaks in building construction for a non-union job.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I think that's how you do it, right? I mean, because now you'd have to do the reverse, because it doesn't make sense to we're bringing Bibles to communist people. It's like, no, we're bringing liberation theology to people who believe that you should be allowed to take away health care from old people or something like that. Right?
Yeah. All right, John, thanks for sitting in for Dean this week and talking about camp. I guess this episode is if Discipline and Punish was about summer camp instead, so Discipline and Summer Camp, I guess. Anyways, as usual, please follow us on Twitter, give us a review on iTunes, and next week, Dean's also gone, but my friend Zach D'Amelia is going to be sitting in, and we're going to talk about some different ways to organize church, I guess, in some non-hierarchical ways. That'd be kind of a wild thing. So stay around for that. Okay, thanks for listening.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. Beside what else are you gonna do? As we kissed in the alley by the Michigan theater, fall snow was glowing in the lights of the downtown. Saw a spark in your eyes, I just spoke it. Said we're gonna turn this whole place upside down. Then you said, my dear,